Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and werewolves. So, the involuntary werewolves of a legend, let's say, shall we? Most films they make lycanthropy look like a cursed existence. The transformations look painful each time. Your loved ones often meet an untimely demise at your paws, and, well, those damned villagers ultimately hunt you down with silver bullets or whatever other method the story relies upon. Being thrust into such a life does sound like a curse, doesn't it? Now, according to multiple cultures, it was not just a figurative cursed lifestyle either. Being a werewolf was a result of a very literal curse. Despite what some movies portray, the curse did not take the form of having a body part end up within a werewolf's jaws. As we touched upon earlier, the concept of becoming a werewolf through receiving a werewolf bite and surviving it came from early horror movies, which often blurred the lines between vampire and werewolf lore. The cross-hallucination of elements between the two types of fang-bearers is not unique to film. In some Eastern European languages, the terms of vampire and werewolf are often used interchangeably, and various tales even featured the peculiar idea that a werewolf who dies comes back as a vampire. But the notion of a werewolf turning a person into a werewolf by planting a non-lethal bite, pure Hollywood, doesn't matter what resources you check, go look back in time, go through all the evidence, do your research, it's fake. According to Folklore, there were two ways in which to become a werewolf against your will. You would be born into the nightmare, or being cursed by a powerful magician of some sort. Either way, that would make you a involuntary werewolf, because you don't want to be one, but you are cursed to be one, you are born to be one. So birthright law can give a whole new meaning to being born, doesn't it? Oh well, to do whatever amazing thing you do. Unlike being a blistering guitar player or natural comedian though, imagine being born to be transformed into a wolf. Not what a typical child would hope for, right? On the topic of children's hopes, werewolves are uncannily associated with the ultimate holiday for children, having a howling Christmas. Being born on Christmas was considered a bad sign, seemingly isolated parts of Europe. It's not difficult to imagine why people from the Middle Ages might have had mixed feelings about the holiday. Christmas is a few days after the longest night of the year, and obviously a cold night at that. Wolves would have been extra hungry and on the hunt for food during these cold nights, and remote villagers would have felt trapped indoors during the majority of the approximate time of year. Hungry, howling wolves, combined with bitter winds outside, would take their toll on the sanity of those who had a fair share of superstition to begin with. A common Scandinavian belief, for instance, was that on this night, werewolves would gather and steal liquor from villagers and then engage in drunken revelry. Now there's a type of werewolf most people can relate to. The associations between lycanthropy and Christmas also manifested in the idea that any child born on this mysterious holiday was destined to become a werewolf. The exact day of the holiday that counts in affecting this curse. A Christmas Eve or Christmas Day varies by culture, despite the startling idea that roughly 1 in 365 people would have been werewolves if they believed that were true. The idea did flourish. Guyon Doe picked up on this interesting bit of folklore and used it in the novel The Werewolf of Paris. The most well-known folktale involving the belief, however, comes from the village of Saint Angelo de Lombardy, which is east of Naples in Italy. It's unclear what year this legend was supposed to have occurred, but it's likely began circulating in the 16th or 17th century. As Christmas Eve approached, it was the eve, not the 25th, that applied in this tale. The village watched with suspicion and fear for a young couple prepared for birth of their child. Apparently everyone in St. Angelo knew what it would mean if the little one arrived on Christmas Eve. He would be doomed to live a life of hideous transformations, and they would be doomed to defending themselves against such a beast. Sure enough, the little boy arrived on the very night everyone feared. Despite their fears, the villagers couldn't bring themselves to punish the little one or his parents. In time, it seemed as if their goodwill toward the family was rewarded. The child was sweet and pleasant, and played nicely with other children. Most days and nights, that is. For each Christmas Eve, the little one would turn into a little wolf, and not a cuddly cub either. He would snap at anyone who came near, including his parents. While he was young and relatively weak, the lycanthrope was easy to contain as each Christmas Eve came around. Every year found him a little bigger and stronger in wolf form. However, and it became increasingly difficult to restrain him when the inevitable change came. The villagers eventually had to change tactics, begin locking themselves and their animals at each Christmas time, allowing the growing werewolf to venture off into the wilderness. He would return every Christmas morning in human form, and fall asleep and basically awaken as if he were any other child. While growing up, the boy knew he was actually a werewolf, but also saw that the villagers accepted him. The acceptance ran deep, too. When he reached his 20s, he was allowed to marry a local girl he had grown up with. They were happy together, and of course had to make special preparations for their first and every Christmas together. Rather than worrying about where to hide the presents, the couple worked out a system where she would lock herself in before his change and wouldn't open the door until he knocked on the door with 3 distinct knocks. This simple code would mean he was human again and ready for her to let him in. After each transformation, she would let him in, wash off the leaves and probably worse material from his gruesome night adventures. After a few years, the couple's arrangement seemed foolproof, which of course meant the wife was destined to become a little too comfortable with the routine. She eventually made a mistake that cost her. No witnesses were there that night when she either didn't lock the door or opened at a time when she just assumed hubby might have changed back into human form. When they found the naked man walking around still covered in the night's gore, the villagers knew his wife hadn't washed and cared for him as she had on other Christmas mornings. Taking him home, the villagers found the horribly mangled remains of his wife. Surprisingly, the folklore tale doesn't end with the villagers punishing the werewolf. Instead, his own guilt did him in, and the man soon after committed suicide. Merry Christmas. Lunar influence. You wouldn't be much of a horror fan if you didn't immediately connect werewolf transformations to a full moon. As we've seen so far, the moon is not necessarily mentioned in most tales of animal-human transformation, but it does play a prominent role in folk magic and superstition. Therefore, it seeped into werewolf lore. Oh, and wolves have really been known to howl at the moon. That's true. Or at least they appear to. Would it be splitting hairs? Fair to say that wolves likely lift their necks for optimal airflow when howling, and as a result only seem that they are howling at the moon, and not actually howling at the moon, but are howling into the air where they can get the best flow for their howl. Imagine the scene though. You're a superstitious villager, afraid you'll never make it home despite the full moon's light reflecting off the snow and guiding you through the woods. Then you come across a wolf howling in that iconic pose. You wonder if it's merely a wolf or something supernatural, as everything looks more horrible when you're alone and vulnerable. Whatever this beast is, it has to be tied to the moon after the encounter like this, right? I mean, that's what happens. The statistics involved in picking a single birthday that makes one a werewolf, such as Christmas, imply our world contains far too many hunters for the allotted human prey. Now imagine that the world would be like if being born or conceived on one of the 13 full or even new moons in a year made one a werewolf. For all the howling wolves on those nights. Europeans around 400 or 500 years ago did not do too much howling in the throes of passion on the night of a full moon. A persistent belief was that if you conceived a child on the night of a full moon, he or she would be born into lycanthropy. In Sicily, this idea was flopped somewhat, when the new moon, or dark of the moon, being the night during which you wouldn't want to conceive a child. conception wasn't the only thing to watch out for. Some people believe that being born on a full moon would do the trick. That's a whole lot of opportunities for a baby to become a werewolf. And that's not true. I was born on a full moon. I am not a werewolf, okay? That's pretty obvious. The moon has a known effect on females, and it does, obviously. Menstrual cycles align with lunar cycles, actually. Why something so natural will be believed to be also result in such malignant outcome is unclear. And childbirth was dangerous business in those days, though. Far too many children never saw their first sunset, let alone the first birthday. Mothers often died in childbirth as well. Superstition was, well, it would commonly find its way into explaining things that had a taint of danger and that held a reminder of our mortality. A common theme in werewolf lore is that whatever made you into a wolf in the first place will also make you repeatedly transform from then onwards. As with the Christmas Eve legend, a werewolf created by being conceived on the full moon would transform on the full moon throughout its life. Forget the astrology of what was going on with the planets at that moment you were born. All this almost makes you want to do a little reverse calculate and try and figure out what was going on in the heavens when you were conceived, doesn't it? Or maybe it really was a matter of being born on a full moon. Makes your furry forehead hurt again. Lots of opportunity to be damned with lunar-linked births, which again is just superstitious, more Hollywood-themed. You know, throw that out of the window. The seventh son of a swinging one. Romanian folklore has a very interesting view of gigolos. While many cultures are particularly judgmental of females who engage in carnal pleasures out of wedlock, it's long been the double standard that such carousing is to be expected of men. We've all heard of sowing wild oats, sure, but sowing werewolves? Sowing werewolves, According to the lands that brought us to Dracula, the ruler and, indirectly, the fictional king of vampires, even being a playboy can have supernatural consequences. The result of too much free love in Romania can be a bitang or seventh son born of wedlock. Various cultures have occult beliefs surrounding the number 7 and birth orders. In ancient times, it's quite a significant number to contend with. The number of known planets, again in ancient times, and days of the week. Everything worked in a tidy astrological system with that number, and when it manifested in nature, you had to take notice. But remember, days are man-made, weeks man-made. Everything like that is man-made. The seventh son of his seventh son could be a prophet, a healer, or a natural magician. It was just too amazing a manifestation to ignore in superstition. It also influenced some famous fiction, such as Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and even the Iron Maiden album. Unlike the other beliefs associated with the werewolf's birthright, this one has an extra air of surprise. If you're born on Christmas Eve, for example, your parents know that you're doomed. If your single mum conceived you with a guy who then hit the road for the next morning, you can't be exactly sure if you have any brothers. More importantly, if you have 6 older ones. As a result of this not knowing, versions of bitang folk tales often centre around a young man not realising he's a werewolf until horrible events start being reported. He eventually uncovers the mystery around his upbringing, runs off into the woods on all fours, perhaps joining a pack of similar illegitimate sons, legitimate threats to humans and livestock. The seventh son belief is not unique to Romania. In Latin America, particularly in Argentina and Brazil, the seventh sons and seventh daughters are believed to become werewolves. Being a gigolo doesn't seem to have anything to do with it there, so at least the little ones could have the support of a large family as they expect their first transformation. Argentina didn't exactly let the seventh son belief die in modern times. At the start of the 20th century, there was a great paranoia and fear over the belief that families were actually abandoning seventh sons, giving them up for adoption, or on occasion even killing them. To quell this behaviour, a law was passed in 1912 that made the president of Argentina the godfather of every seventh son born in the country, granting these children a gold medal at their baptisms and even a scholarship. The law seems to have worked because they never took it off the books. In your genes, to shred your genes monthly. Sometimes folklore is wonderfully simple. What is one way that a werewolf can be made? Well, when a werewolf and a human, or perhaps two werewolves, love each other very much, they then, you know how the story goes. It's not surprising to find that people of the Middle Ages would have thought you can inherit lycanthropy from your parents. The era is not exactly known for its advancements in genetics, okay? People from the time had zero understanding of how family traits are passed along, but basic family resemblances were understood. The idea of looking like your parents or taking after them in some behavioural way was commonly accepted. Inheriting the trait of lycanthropy had some superstition helping it along as a belief. Being a werewolf by birth is considered a form of family curse, and curses have been thought to pass on to children since biblical times, and the concept of sins of the fathers. A recurring theme in the world of werewolves is to know your family tree, and if at all possible, there may be furry branches on it. But what about the accidental werewolves? For every fleshed-out, prevalent legend in folklore, there are dozens of brief ones that haven't barely survived, and which have likely got mangled in the retelling. Tidbits abound in werewolf lore. The shorter, simple beliefs that follow represent some ways that could have been used by a person looking to become a werewolf, or could just as easily have been an accidental conversation waiting to happen. You had to be careful what you ate in medieval Europe, not just due to the lack of refrigeration. One of the most common beliefs was that eating the meat of an animal that was killed by a wolf would turn you into a werewolf. There were edicts made to ban eating such meat as a result, forming a royal precursor to the FDA. You also had to watch that your food wasn't infected with a peculiar substance that could lead to serious illness, hallucinations. Eating random plants in the woods held a supernatural threat as well. In the Balkans, there were verifying accounts of a flower that, if eaten, would cause lycanthropy. Many matters worse was on the various versions of the legend. Totally disagreed about this flower's appearance. Was it the red, daisy-like flower? Maybe the yellow snapdragon? Perhaps it was a white, sunflower-like plant with a sickly smell. Not that munching on any of them sounds particularly appetizing, but eating the wrong one was an accidental transformation waiting to happen, it seems. Being thirsty while lost in the woods was just as dangerous. You couldn't just walk up to any small puddle and take a sip. The little puddle could be rainwater gathered in wolf's paw prints, and drinking it was another way to become a werewolf. Similarly, it was a certain trouble to drink from the same stream as wolves, although no safe distance from their drinking is given, and streams can be long. Some streams were even believed to be cursed, such as the one in Harz Mountains of Germany, where drinking from the water caused one Countess Hilda van Breber to be transformed into a wolf. Her own husband had to hunt her down, although he didn't know it was her until after she was killed. Werewolf lore is full of such stories, in which a spouse only finds out after a wolf is killed that it was actually his or her mate, while the mystical flower mentioned earlier seems tough to connect to anything historically or mystically. And the idea that eating tainted meat or drinking water associated with a real wolf would transform you was a testament to the power of the belief in sympathetic magic. If the object you take into yourself is somehow connected to a real wolf, you run the risk of becoming a wolf as well. The moon comes into play with versions that could have been accidental or intentional. For example, some believed that merely sleeping outdoors under a full moon would do the trick. I have done that many times naked. I'm not a werewolf. Other conversation legends involved getting naked, rolling around in the soil during a full moon. I've done that, and I'm not a werewolf. That may not sound at first glance like something you do by accident. It's something you do for fun, though. But if you let your imagination go free, you may find that the latter was not so unlikely in the time without hotel rooms. So what about the witches, the wizards, the cursing? As we've looked at earlier, the first werewolf transformations of legend, they were caused by gods. Mesopotamia and Greece both had examples of gods and goddesses later on. The same is even true of the biblical God, getting angry at a human and turning him, always males in these cases, into a wolf. Divine power and vengeance. Humans trying to emulate divine power have always been the practical occultists of the worlds. Those who try to apply the occult to change the world have been called magicians, witches and sorcerers, to give a few monikers. Such powerful practitioners of arcane arts were always feared, even if the worst they were guilty of was trying to help farmers with weather or heal villagers. Some earned the fear, of course, performing decidedly more sinister rites. If you crossed the nastiest of these evil magicians, they could allegedly cast a potent curse on you, an interemulation of divine legends, and the powers the gods were said to wield. This curse could involve transformation. The practice of witches turning people into toads has become a pop culture mainstay. During the days of the Inquisition, it was no joke. Through their alleged dealings with the devil, these witches of folklore could travel through the air to be part of bizarre rituals held in honour of and supposedly by the Dark Man himself. Their power was such that they could cause any malady they wished to effect, even if it was an entire village. Turning a victim into a wolf would be relatively simple for someone with such power. This specific type of curse was one of choice in Finland. In that country, however, lycanthropy was not necessarily a lifelong curse. It could sometimes be reversed, sort of. You see, if a werewolf was cursed by a magician, then he or she would often retain a wolf tail for the rest of his or her human life. As you might recall from the previous chapter in Poland, the predominant cause of lycanthropy is the curses of witches. As in Finland, there's a tale in which a tail remains on the werewolf after transformation. The French loup-garous were often believed to be those who were unlucky enough to have crossed a witch. This belief survived when settlers came to Louisiana and resulted in the local loup-garou legend. The loup-garou was supposed to be a humanoid creature with a wolf head, was said to haunt the swamplands outside of New Orleans. Some versions of the legends have the cursed person only remaining a werewolf for 101 days. Other versions try to tie the legend to disobeying the rules of Lent. Nothing like New Orleans for having wild activities around Lent, let's say. It bears repeating that witches, as portrayed in tales of lycanthropy, can really just be given that name as a convenient synonym for servant of the devil. These servants would sometimes not necessarily curse someone, but instead they tricked people into becoming indentured servants of the devil, as in the legend of one poor shepherd in France called Pierre Bourgault. During a terrible storm in 1502, Pierre Bourgault lost most of his flock of sheep and ventured out to find them and recover his means of livelihood. While searching, he came across 3 black horsemen. Note that the words black or dark always appear in descriptions of servants of the devil, but it's unclear if black is used in this case to describe the strange people's clothing, demeanour, supernatural features, skin tone, or all of these factors combined. These horsemen said they would help Bourgault find his flock and would give him money if he would swear allegiance to their master. He was desperate, so agreed to those terms and to meet with them in a few days to fulfil his part of the agreement. And when they met, Pierre and his new acquaintances performed a sort of black mass, complete with the shepherd renouncing Christianity, swearing to stay away from church. The leader of the dark servants, Moisette, kept the promise he and the others had made too. Not only was the flock of sheep returned, but for as long as Pierre stayed away from church, his sheep were kept safe from harm. And for a while, that one black mass resulted in happiness for the shepherd. After 2 years, Pierre tried to find his way back to his religion and attempted to enter a church. This return to faith was not to be, and he was quickly reminded of the dark promise by a servant of the devil named Michel Verdun. It is not clear if Verdun was one of the original 3 horsemen. He forced Pierre to do a new ritual, reaffirming his allegiance to the Dark Lord. During this ritual, Verdun spread a salve of some sort into Pierre and onto himself. Pierre was soon after horrified to find that he had turned into a wolf, along with his sinister friend Verdun. Pierre and Verdun went on to kill and feast upon children and adult villagers, allegedly in wolf form. They were caught in 1521 and corroborated each other's versions of this supernatural tale. After their executions, the tale was placed on the wall in the local church to warn villagers of the perils of leaving the flock, literally and figuratively. And did Pierre really join his friend on these sinister adventures in wolf form? What was the salve that was applied to him? Hallucinogens may have played a role in transformations such as this one. We'll have to revisit this topic later. I mean, it's very interesting regardless. You know, the whole drama of renouncing his religion and being damned, according to the belief system he grew up in, may have added extra suggestibility to the mix. What do you think, guys? And we're going to leave this part here. The next part, we're going to look at curses and the power of suggestion. You see, the thing is, right, let me explain something. There is a rule in magic, as in all magic. Believe in thyself. Know thy craft. Believe in thyself. Know thy craft. You see, it's not really about what the witch says or does. It's whether that person believes it or not. If that person truly believes it, then that person can begin to create a stream of events coming from just that thought form they have created in themselves. Thank you for listening. When we come back, we'll look at curses. Many blessings.